So, hello everyone, and welcome back to The Shift Show, the podcast that helps ambitious professionals navigate the changing world of work with clarity, confidence, and a bit of courage. I'm your host, Rachel Bourne, and today we're starting at the center of the storm because no matter how fast the world of work changes, it's really a lot about how you lead and manage yourself through these changes. So today I have joining me two brilliant executive coaches who have helped thousands of leaders build that inner foundation. The first is Patti O'Neal. She's the founder of Arcapa and a seasoned executive coach with over 30 years of cross-functional leadership experience. She partners with Fortune 500 and entrepreneurial organizations to develop high-performing leadership teams. Known for her deep commitment to understanding culture and context, Patti helps leaders engage more effectively and consistently deliver results. And Dr. Bonnie Maitlen, a board-certified executive coach and transformation catalyst with a doctorate in communication and adult learning. She's known for guiding leaders and teams to their breakthrough performance, combining academic depth with practical insight. Bonnie has partnered with top executives and boards to align talent with bold strategies and building the leadership capabilities needed to thrive in today's fast-changing world. Patti and Bonnie, welcome to the Shift Show.
Thank you.
I am so privileged to have you here. Just can't thank you guys enough.
You're welcome. Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
So right out of the gate, I got to ask, I really want to know how many people do you know how many people you have actually coached? Both of you have so much experience. And then what is the one thing that you know about the world of work today?
Bonnie, you've coached 1 million people.
I was trying to count up. I thought, I don't have a good record. I was going to have you answer that first so I could come up hundreds. And I know that I've coached in 35 different countries, not face-to-face, but in a lot of different cultures and climates and situations and lots of different personalities. That's what makes it interesting.
Part of the reason I went into coaching was because of my admiration for Bonnie and her skill. So I watched her coach from afar. We had an opportunity to work together. So, I've probably coached hundreds, but not near what Bonnie has done.
That's still amazing. I can't even just think about kind of the impact that you have made on other people's lives. And that's got to be really fulfilling.
I think
Love
the
that
thing about coaching is that you're invited into someone's life to just help them look at it in a different way. And I walk away from that just feeling privileged that, I was able to get a peek into their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It doesn't stop at the office door.
No, definitely not.
Right. That's true. And regardless of whether or not it's like people are still bringing their whole person to work, sometimes pieces of it are hidden, but it certainly helped me.
One impacts the other.
Well, in our second episode, I talked about one of the premises that I'm really testing with the podcast is kind of the skills framework. I went through and did a lot of collection of research and all the, reports that were coming out around these are the skills of the future that you need or things you need in 2025 to be successful. And it really kind of came down to about 19, 20 different skills. And I put them in this, matrix where I was really thinking between humans and systems, right? Or technology systems, because I think there really are human systems, but it's that human to technology component and this management of self to others, right? On the continuum. So we're really going to dive into that self and human quadrant in the matrix today. I'm calling it self-mastery and resilience, but self-management. And it's really just kind of how you are helping your own self navigate through all of these changes.
Uh-huh.
Before we fully jump in with that, though, I did ask my LinkedIn crew. I was like, got some really amazing executive coaches. What do you want to know? And one of the most interesting ones kind of just came in from Sandy. I thought it just framed the whole conversation today. And she asked, what skills are the most valuable for effective leadership today? And I just would love to know your perspective on skills.
Well, I'll go first. I think we hear a lot about vulnerability. And I believe that's certainly what followers want from leaders is they really want to see that human to human contact, that someone is vulnerable to share how they're thinking and feeling. I'd go one step further. I think humility, and it's different than vulnerability, is important. I think when you have a humble spirit, it's much easier to admit wrong direction, to admit you aren't really sure. And so I think that there's a power in being humble.
I agree.
That is helpful.
Do you feel like leaders they feel like they have to show up as like the expert that knows everything? Is that pressure?
Gosh, Bonnie, you've probably seen so much more of this, but I think I'll juxtapose it to the interview process and being the selected candidate. All through the interview process, you're asked to prove yourself. Give us your bona fides. What are your skills? How do you handle this? And then you get into the organization and they want you to hush up about that. They want you to see them. And so I think there's that interesting part of that shift that happens. I think it's very similar.
Interesting.
You've got to be vulnerable and see the landscape as it is.
Hey, we're the Payroll Baddies, and our mission is to make payroll fun and relatable.
And call out industry when they hear it.
You got to call it out. You got to call it like you see it. But we also got to shine a light on all those unsung payroll heroes out there, making sure we get paid.
Yeah, those are the real payroll baddies out there, and we love sharing their stories and showing them love.
With gold chain and everything, baby.
By the way, SAP is the best payroll out there, and if you don't like it,
get out.
I often ask leaders, when you think about an amazing leader, describe who that is. And I think a lot of it goes back to things that Patti said. It is that they are supportive, they're humble, they're other-focused. When I think of some of the key skills, I think of curiosity. If I could create a curiosity hat and give it to everyone, I would. Because if I can remain open and curious about things, wonder what's going on here, wonder why they're reacting that way, wonder what this situation is really about, and I add a dose of positivity to it, and then surround it with a learning attitude that I don't know everything. I'm here to learn and observe and be in this situation. It kind of covers a number of things that I think we're going to talk about today. But at the core of it, if I can just be who I am, be open, curious, and other focused, that will help me be a bit more effective.
Oh, interesting. Well, I certainly couldn't frame that any better as we kind of jump into this, because the first question in particular I'd like for us to talk about, and Patti, this phrase gets tossed around a lot, but in your coaching, what does real growth mindset actually look like in practice?
Well, Bonnie's point, I would pull on the curiosity. A growth mindset has within it a basic human curiosity, meeting challenges with curiosity, stepping outside our usual paths for solving problems. I think that growth mindset, it's interesting. It kind of reminds me of New Year's resolutions. What do I want to get better at? What do we need to be more of? And that might come from an alignment with our stakeholders, and not me-centric, but as Bonnie mentioned, others. I think often stakeholders will tell you what will delight them if you'll ask and listen.
I think that makes a lot of sense, but a lot of times you're getting so many inputs. And as a leader, like Bonnie, what do you say to someone who might get overwhelmed by that? And whether it's like, sometimes in that growth mindset, it's also like, I need to grow, I need to change, my team needs to grow, I need to change. They can get stuck or feel overwhelmed. Like, how do you get someone kind of through that?
Well, I think first you step back and take a breath, because there are so many different things coming at us all at once. And sometimes we just have to step back and pause. And in the pause, do a little bit of reflecting. If you're overwhelmed, and I see so much of that today, I think you have to start to list everything that's on my plate. Most people are trying to deal with a buffet-sized plate with a dinner plate capability. I mean, we can only handle a dinner plate, but we have a buffet plate. So there's a lot spilling over. And I think there's a moment where you have to step back and say, what is really important? What is most important to do? And is it most important for me to do it? And how joyful am I doing that? Because there are a lot of things that we do that are not joyful. And if I can do the things that I'm best at and I like doing, I'm going to be better at those things. And there are a lot of other people who can do some of the things that I'm doing. If I can do what I'm doing in my sleep, I shouldn't be doing it. Somebody else.
That's interesting. Yeah.
You know, Bonnie helped me, and she probably doesn't even know this, but I used to put on my credenza a Post-it note that says, "Is it me? Is it now?"
I used to train myself to say, what learning opportunity am I depriving someone else of because I'm doing it myself? And especially if it's something I could do in my sleep. I need, to let other people do it. So I think it is being intentional and choiceful and doing the things that are most important. And so many of us are perfectionists, and we want to do it all, and we want to do it all well. And we just have to let go of some of it. So when you're stuck or overwhelmed, I think stepping back, taking a breath, and saying, what's the most important thing that I need to be doing?
So on the other end of the spectrum of growth mindset, you have this kind of fixed mindset, right? So what do you say to the leaders like, you know what, this is me. This is what you get. That's what you hired, right?
That's not a safe place to be.
Not in this changing dynamic space, but it is a challenging mindset to get to, especially when you get like more, senior in your career and you have learned a lot of the lessons. You may feel pretty entitled to what you think the direction is too, right? Especially when you're an expert.
I might ask them, how's that working out for you?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a reason why I'm coaching you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think when you get stuck, you have to ask yourself if you're stuck in the knowing. Are you in a learning mode or are you in a knowing mode? And confidence comes from experience and learning, and you've had these experiences before, you use them. I'm certainly not suggesting you throw those over the wall and don't pay attention to them, but what else? It's interesting, if you look in history, you'll see that the ice chest manufacturers, the ice box, didn't become the refrigerator makers. The buggy whip makers did not become the steering wheel makers. We don't curve jump very easily, as Guy Kawasaki says. We kind of hang on to Smith Corona made typewriters and not computers.
Yeah, there's some great examples out there of those who held on to the old too long and the window of opportunity passed by. And I have a list of the companies that are no longer, that are such a shock because they were the steady state companies, but they missed that learning opportunity. They weren't paying attention to what the world is like today and what people need today, as opposed to what worked in the past. So I think in that fixed mindset, we settle into what has worked, and we aren't aware that the world is changing around us so quickly. It's hard to even keep up with what people need or want right now.
Well, and that's actually a really good point, because I think with this, how dynamic things are changing and how at the speed of digital now, right? This kind of lifelong learning is becoming a huge advantage. How fast can you learn? How fast can you adapt? But you hit on it, I think, a little bit earlier, Bonnie. I'd love both of you to comment on this, but when you're leading these people through some of these transitions, I think we also are seeing more pushback because of burnout. People are just assimilating so much, and then you have kind of the social media onslaught. Like, there's just information everywhere. What separates the people who bounce back versus those who burn out?
I think some of it goes to really understanding at your core, what is your passion? What is your life goal? What is it that you really want to be doing? I do a lot of life planning, which is not life coaching, life planning, where you're really thinking about what is at the core of me. What are my core values? What is my life goal? What is it that I really want to be doing? And when you understand that, I think it's easier to be resilient and to bounce back and to be choiceful. So it took me a long time to discern mine and to figure it out, but I really like to help people do what they are capable of doing, being more than they're capable of doing, and to connect what they love to do with what they're doing. And so I think at the core, we know that inside of us, those things that are important to us and our values and those other pieces. And when we stick closer to that, I think we find greater satisfaction. I think some people who are really stressed and over the top are those that are trying to do things that fall outside of what they believe in or what they love to do. So I've been called on to do that life planning piece more frequently. It used to be it was good for transitions if you're going to retire, if you're going to shift directions. But now I almost think you have to get in touch with that first and build everything else around it rather than the other way around.
It's like that higher purpose gets you through the hard stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think also in this notion of resilience, I think it's having a true relationships in your life. I remember many, many studies about retention at work was, do you have a friend at work? It was always great boss, meaningful work. Well, they never defined really what great boss was, but I suspect there's a relationship there, a meaningful relationship there. I think practicing self-care, and I guess self-care also is not just taking breaks, not working till you're exhausted. You're probably in a decremental kind of situation there, where you're, the longer you're working in 14-hour days, the less able you are, honestly, to get the right results that you want. And we sometimes are so attracted to the effort that we don't, we're attracted to the effort. We've been rewarded for our effort. We've been acknowledged for our long hours. And sometimes it feels like, I need to take a pause is not in our wheelhouse. But the other thing besides taking a pause is the self-talk. Are we condemning ourselves? What's the self-talk like?
Oh, the self-talk. I can't tell you how many people, and even I have had to go through some imposter syndrome recently, even changes in my own life and career. And I'm like, I'm going to choose to listen to the smart people around me as opposed to my own inner self-talk.
Yeah, because that can become habitual. So I even find that people that, and I believe Bonnie does this, I do this, when you get up in the morning, set your intentions for the day, however you do that in your life. At the end of the day, be grateful. And then some days it's like, I'm grateful I had heat in the house because I can't find anything else today that really jazzed me.
That was good. I was going to ask you what practices you really have seen.
Those are seriously, Bonnie mentioned reflection. If you must take time to pause, to reflect, set your intentions, have gratitudes, and I think it keeps you more resilient when you talk about this burnout, and monitor your self-talk.
Yeah, I have a friend who, if I will say something negative, oh, that was a stupid thing to do, she'll go, did you hear yourself? You just spoke poorly to yourself. Her voice is in my head. If I ever say something detrimental about myself, her face pops up. Because we should be affirming ourselves and believe and lifting ourselves up. If we aren't doing that for ourselves, who else is going to do that for us?
Mm-hmm.
But I agree with you, Patti. I think the times that I have kept a gratitude journal, which is setting my intentions at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, listing the things I'm grateful for, I'm in a much better frame. I think what happens when we get so busy, it just all begins to swirl. It builds and builds, and we don't even know we're as busy as we are, or that we're excluding family or eating or other things because we're in this spin. And you have to just break it somehow, step out of it, and really look at how am I nourishing myself? And so if you think about burnout, I think you have to have your own rejuvenation plan.
Do you see people do that intentionally? Like, this is my strategy, my rejuvenation strategy?
Yes, I do. And I think it is the whole practice of looking at myself personally. What personally am I going to do, such as clean eating, taking time with family, putting some boundaries around what it is that I'm doing. And so having an actual plan that you can go to is most helpful.
Bonnie helped me years ago to do a life plan, and I picked a time frame of 10 years. We're at the end of 10 years, Bonnie, I think.
Oh, my.
And what's interesting is the 3 goals I set for myself, I did.
Awesome.
Good for you. Good.
Yeah, I followed the plan.
Yeah.
But having the plan and having that coaching to go through deciding what as I looked at my life and what I wanted in it, you have a strategy at work, you have plans at work, but we neglect those for ourselves in those longer term. Once I got my master's, or once we passed those kind of educational goals, perhaps we sometimes lose sight of what we want in our lives.
Yeah,
I think
that's
that
a
helps
really
people decide
interesting.
if they want the next rung or not.
Yeah, and I think it's okay for someone to realize I don't want that next rung. I did that myself, and I can remember, a personal friend saying, "But you aren't going to get this and this and this." Yeah, but I'm going to have time with family. I'm going to be doing the things that I love to do, the things I think I'm best at doing, which isn't managing other people and climbing the ladder. It's really being with people and coaching and doing those things that I feel most gifted at doing.
How can you tell the difference between needing to just reframe something, right? When it's sort of like if it's just really a self-talk, or they need a full reset. Like, Rachel, maybe managing people isn't your thing, right? Maybe you need to go look at that. Is there like a line in the sand that you guys can have seen?
I kind of see them as kind of opposite of what you just said. It feels like to me a reset is like you've got the path, you just need to start over, or you need to do it again. Maybe something came up, or some factor presented itself you have to make an adjustment for. But the reset to me is almost a reboot. Reframing to me goes to the balcony. I need to look at this play differently. How am I viewing the actors from a distance? I was this character in the play. Now, if I went to the balcony, what's going on in the play? I think the panoramic view comes into reframe. And I think often we should be seeking out others in reframe. What do they see? You don't have to do all this alone.
That point of view from others and how others are seeing and experiencing it, for me, has been, Patti, you did this with me. It was incredibly impactful.
I think that's what people miss in coaching is, some people think it's a rehab job. Some people may see it as therapy, all kinds of misnotions about what is and is not coaching. But I think that whole opportunity to see yourself freshly, lay things down that are no longer serving you or serving the organization or going to get the problem solved is really powerful, because we're creatures of habit. We have patterns. Those ruts in our brain are real. We run down the ruts.
Bonnie, we've talked a lot about change, and we are living in constant transformation. How can professionals develop more agility in how they handle this change personally, especially when it does feel sometimes really relentless?
It does. I think for me, one of the important things is to be intentional, just to be choiceful, decide what is it that I'm going to focus in on. And with all of that noise all around, how do I really zero in on the things that are more important? So agility isn't flexibility, because if you're flexible, you can bend and bend and bend and break. It's flexibility with intelligence. It's being clear about what you're choosing to do or not do, how you're going to show up. And so there's some intentionality there. And I think it goes back to that learner mindset too. I have to figure out what's the right thing in this situation and adapt appropriately, but again, keeping myself intact.
Yeah. Do you feel, Patti, like agility is a personality trait, or do you feel like this is a skill you can develop?
Oh, it's a skill you can develop, I think. I think some personalities are more agile than others, naturally maybe. But I think to Bonnie's point is that there's this notion of being intentional. And I would say one of the first things I do with my clients, most leaders want to be more strategic, or think further down the road and not be caught up in the tyranny of the urgent. The first thing I always say is, show me your calendar.
Oh, I bet that's insightful.
Oh, well, you can imagine their calendars. So the more senior you become in the company, actually, the more your independence goes away, because you're required to meet that customer. You're required to attend that board meeting. And your calendar, even at the beginning of the year, is loaded. So the notion of agility feels like, when does that happen? Back to, is it me, is it now? You've got to open up calendar. You've got to have time to pause. And I would say time to prepare. I think we go to that next meeting and and I would say that to anybody listening to this podcast, when you show up at that next meeting, you're back to back to back. Why are you even there? I mean, do you even know what value proposition you're supposed to be bringing? What do you want out of the meeting? What can you add to the conversation? And when we're kind of still in the mindset of the last conversation and sort of half paying attention, we get into this multitasking brain. We've not shut down the other conversation to move to the next. And focus is so critical to being our best cognitive thinking. We know about the brain that, I can tie my shoes and talk to you, Rachel, because tying my shoes lives in my basal ganglia, and conversation with you lives in my prefrontal cortex. It's a physiology thing. So I cannot have I can't talk to Bonnie and read an email at the same time.
Right.
And hold them both because they both live on the same stage. And I think that's one of the things about this notion of agility is that it's really deciding when to change my focus.
And when to say no. When I look at a calendar like you described, I'll ask, why do you have to be in this meeting, in this meeting, in this meeting? Again, who are you depriving an opportunity of being in a meeting because you're in that one? And when people get really scrutinized and look at different meetings, they realize, I'm not really contributing a lot. There are other things that I should be doing. How many organizations have created no meeting Mondays? Doesn't that tell us something? Right?
Yeah.
Because we're just meeting driven, going from one to the next to the next. And so you have to say, can I really contribute to this meeting? Am I the right person to be in this meeting? What would I be doing with my time if I wasn't in this particular meeting? That's probably not a popular thing to be saying, but I think it's part of that buffet-sized plate and trying to put things into a dinner.
And then with the rise of remote work, I mean, you don't have some of those, even offices as opposed to like collaborative space, you don't have some of those happy accidents. So you drives even more meeting culture from some of the more recent data I've seen. And I think that continues to be challenging. But what if someone, like, say you have a work culture, what if they don't feel comfortable saying no? What are some other best practices you've kind of seen?
I think to Patti's point, it's very helpful when you are looking at a meeting to give people pre-work, to send things in advance, to give people an opportunity to really prepare and contribute in a better way. Because when you just show up, and if you're a person who doesn't step forward more than others, then the dominant voices are going to take over. And we may not get the advantage of some of the people who are more silent and need to be invited in. But doing a little bit of pre-work and letting people have some thinking ahead of time, particularly the introverts, I have found they really need that to be able to contribute better in a meeting.
Another thing I think is powerful is planning. I have the opportunity to look at, if you don't have a planning routine as a professional, you should have one. And your planning routine may not be the same as mine or Bonnie's or yours, Rachel, but it needs to be your routine. Some people plan at the end of the day for the next day. That's when they look at those meetings and say, now, what's my part? They've known it's on their calendar. And I'm not suggesting that's for the big things, but particularly for standing meetings, which are just so dangerous. I remember in the 90s, I took my conference table out of my office and put in cocktail tables, those tall ones.
Oh, that's an interesting
with
idea.
No chairs.
So people wouldn't stay for very long. That's hilarious.
We took care of business. We had standing meetings, meaning you don't sit down.
That's a really interesting idea. And it's so funny how these are like kind of tactical changes, but they
make big changes.
They do. I also had a role where I'd go talk about tech roadmaps, and then I'd be doing, inclusion strategies. And sometimes it felt like mental acrobatics, jumping from, different layers of tactical, and like going across that, and even about like topics. So I blocked my calendar in more chunks. So like I would have a morning of one-on-ones, or I'd have an afternoon of diversity and inclusion, or some of those pieces, which helped cut down on what I felt was like the acrobatic part that I had to change so much.
Smart to do that.
It took a while, and I had to start really researching, how do I cut down on this? Because it was contributing to exhaustion.
There's a theory that says every time you change topics, the amount of energy that it takes. So if you're in the same topic all day, you have less energy spent than when you're bouncing, like you were describing, from this to this. It's centrality theory. I can remember that now, but it made me think about it. Or can you arrange your day in a way that you are staying with a more similar same topic, here and here, just the way you arrange your day, even.
Yeah.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, Bonnie, I think honestly looking at yourself, are you a morning person? Are you an afternoon person? Do you have a dip in the afternoon? Do you get your energy back at 7 o'clock at night? What's your biorhythm? And, saving, do the more mundane things when you're sluggish or, not at your best, and then save those precious, I'm at my best hours for the toughest topics, if you have the privilege of doing that.
Rachel, a lot of what we've talked about today goes to the center of know myself. The more I know myself, my skills, my capabilities, my values, my biorhythms, all of that, it helps me figure out how to be at my best. And we don't really teach that or put time aside to focus on that. And it's always interesting when I do a workshop and we touch on that, people say, wow, I never thought about that. And that's really important for me to think about.
Absolutely.
Because if I don't know those things, I cannot manage them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the self-awareness piece is huge.
So the other piece that I would share on that just, I find this to be very helpful. When you're trying to shift behavior, learn a new behavior, there's a shift that happens. And the very, very first thing on the shift is awareness. I have to be aware of what I'm doing or not doing if I'm going to make a change. And so if I'm very dominant and I've decided that I'm going to be less dominant and more open to other people, first thing is, am I aware of that? And the second piece is acceptance. Do I accept that that's the way I am and that I want to change? And you'll have a lot of people say, oh, gotta love me. That's the way I am. Firstborn, people know that about me. And so they work around that. That's not an issue. I'm saying, seriously? So once you get past awareness, then it's learning the new behavior. It's the dance steps. It's learning the dance steps. And then you practice them, or when you do it long enough, it becomes mastery. You do it without thinking. But it begins with awareness. If I'm not aware, I can't go anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are going to talk about how to help people develop some more of that self-awareness. But before we do, there's one other skill I just want to double click on, and that's this personal creativity. And, when you're stuck in execution mode and there's a real momentum to that, or you're experiencing burnout, you don't necessarily have the time and energy to be creative. And I think, Patti, it was you that said, a lot of leaders just want to be more strategic. Sometimes, that's a huge place where creativity kind of comes into that. Where do you see creativity show up most often in high-performing professionals? And then how do you kind of help them reconnect with that part of themselves?
Yeah, that's a good question. Go ahead, Patti.
Well, I was just thinking, my experience in different organizations, different roles demand more and less creative nature, probably, and creative skill. Some are sitting at the heart of innovation and creativity, and of course, they have to bring it. When you think of working with a startup versus a Fortune 5, it's, the creativity is almost synonymous with startup. It's exceedingly tactical, but everybody's figuring it out on the fly. You think you know, but you don't know, really. I think the creative gene that lives in all of us, we all have it. We're all creative. We may not be artistic. We may not be musical, but we are certainly all creative. And so I think that sometimes it's harder to see the execution in a large organization. It kind of beats the creative out of us. If we've had some experiences where our best and most brilliant ideas seem to not get through the ceiling, then we get frustrated and maybe have a give up feeling about our own creativeness. But I think, Bonnie, what would you say about that? Have you seen a difference in size of organization?
Yeah. And I think even within a team, we're trying to be more creative within a team, even, at that level. I think it goes back to the learning mindset and getting away from a fixed mindset. If I'm just stuck over here, then I think there are provocative questions we have to ask, like, well, if you weren't over here, what's possible? Or when you say, well, we can't do that. Well, if we could do it, what would that look like? So it's just, creating that challenge to get people out of their box and to think of something in a different way. And I think you're right. Some people are more naturally creative than others, but all of us have the ability. And a lot of my work is within teams and what's working and not working. And you have to learn how to be creative to get things done. And sometimes it's just giving, unlocking the creativity, the curiosity. Go back to curiosity. I'm curious if we could do it. If there was one thing we did that was different, what would that be? So I think some of it from a leader level, when you're trying to bring creativity out in others, it's asking those upside down questions. If we could do one thing, or and if you put it in the future, it's always easier to see. So 6 months from now, we are killing it. We have a grand new creative idea. What does that look like?
Mm-hmm. I love that. Frame it, it's future mindset. I think that's nice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the other thing I think too is stakeholder mindset. What would delight our stakeholders? I had a client and had a great example of Procter and Gamble was, they're in this space of products that clean things. And so they were doing lots of focus groups around mopping. And they asked a great question of stakeholders, what do you hate about mopping? So they didn't ask them what they wanted more of. They said, what do you hate about mopping? And across all kinds, either commercial or residential stakeholders and customers, it was the dirty water. No matter what system I have, I got to deal with that stinking dirty water, commercially or whatever. And this came the Swiffer. But they got there in a backwards kind of way. Not what do you want, but what do you hate? What is uncomfortable? What do you dislike?
I love that concept. Like, yeah, and human-centered design brings that in. Like, if you kind of sort of think through your stakeholder experience, one of the tapes that plays in my head is if Henry Ford went and asked his customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse.
Yeah.
Right. I think about that all the time. And, a lot of times we will go and ask our customers, what do you want? Right.
They don't even know what they want.
They don't know. Yeah. And finding new ways to discover that. I like that. Like, what do you really hate is a good
yeah,
way
what would you like to get rid of if you could?
Right. Mm-hmm. Just bringing kind of that concept of team into, I think sometimes this also comes back to self-identity and that context of the team as well. I mean, I've been in teams sometimes where I didn't feel creative, right? I had colleagues who would make designs that didn't recognize gravity. And I'm like, God, that's really creative, right? And so I personally carried that for a little while, right? I think helping kind of people see themselves within that team and context can really help them maybe break out of their mindset of I'm not creative.
Well, I think it's letting voices into the room that are the naive experts. That, I met with a group of lawyers years ago and I asked them if they ever commented on each other's work. And, they were divided into employment law, patent law, all the kinds of tax law. And of course, they would never comment. If I'm an employment lawyer, I would not comment on patent attorneys' intellectual property choices. But I'm like, aren't you smart people that have been trained as lawyers? I mean, wouldn't you rather hear the objection in the room of friendlies?
They just weren't using even their diversity of thought within their teams.
No.
Yeah.
And to me, that lives in this space of curiosity and agility and creativity, is to use everything at your disposal.
And it's really shifting from telling to asking. If we could help people shift from telling, where they feel like they're the expert, to asking big, curious questions, that brings out the best in all of us. Because when you tell, you don't learn anything. But when you ask, you learn, what's the other person's perspective, what's the impossible idea we should look after. We learn things when we ask questions and listen.
Yeah, I think that makes
sense. It's also appreciating someone else's style. I might draw a model or a picture of what I think it could look like because I see patterns and connections. Someone else might bring their words and they could apply those words to the picture. I mean, letting people do it in their unique way and not insisting on a format all the time or a regular process of how we do this in our team.
Yeah, your way is not always the right way. Mm-hmm.
letting it kind of morph.
Yeah. Love that. So I think that also now kind of comes back to the superpower that I could not have teed up better with Bonnie, is that kind of self-awareness and your emotional intelligence, related to that. How do you help people develop more self-awareness? I'm just going to start with the simplest of the questions.
There are some, different tools or questions. The other one is when you get input from other people, whether it's a 360 assessment or it's stakeholder conversations or it's something, and you get different ideas from other people about yourself, and then you get that feedback, that is one way of increasing the self-awareness or finding out where I view myself differently than others do. And I think that is often a beginning place for someone to really start to look at themselves as a leader, is when they hear the truth about how other people experience them. It might not be the truth, but it's what other people see. And so to understand it fully, you really need to get into conversation with different people and, open up a dialogue and listen. So I think it starts with understanding, holding the mirror up. What do other people see? And if it's very different than what I really am, how am I not expressing myself in a way that other people understand me? What am I holding back? How is my dominance when I'm coming across so aggressively, just pushing everybody else away so nobody wants to get to know me? So, it's getting those insights into how other people see me and then digesting it and understanding how am I coming forward in a way that presents myself and people see me that way? What do I need to do differently? And some of it is getting back down to just being my authentic self. How do I trust that I am good enough and that I can show up the way that I naturally would show up and that people will accept me for that? But that's another whole episode, right?
100%. No, duly noted. Yes.
Yeah, that's a big episode. Because we have to accept who we are and appreciate who we are. And it helps to get feedback when people don't see us the way we think they do. That can be a real beginning. One piece of information that is absolutely present and we don't tap into is I can look at the other person's reaction. So if I'm coming across in a way that is belittling or dominant or something else, when I look at the other person and I see them, move back or roll their eyes or something else, there's information there. And if I'm courageous enough to step into it and say, Patti, I feel like we didn't really connect on what I just said. I feel like what I said and what you heard are two different things. Can we step back for a moment and can we replay that? But we don't usually have the courage to do that. But we all have that right in front of us. We can see the other person's reaction and then try to step in to understand, what they're experiencing.
Which is that third quadrant of emotional intelligence. Can you read the room? Are you looking at the clues?
Mm-hmm. And how do you help someone who maybe isn't naturally emotionally attuned to things like that? And I even think about neurodiversity and some of that as well. How practically, how can they start, building some of that? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, neurodiversity will bring up totally other elements, I think, in that journey. But I do think that once you have an intention to watch for reaction, once you have an intention to listen with curiosity, so, I think you can move dials by your intentional practices that you're adding through this journey. You don't want to go to the dieter's dilemma where you're trying to add 5 things at once. I'm going to drink more water. I'm going to cut out carbs. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to join the gym, whatever that is. In coaching, we let's work on one thing at a time. Let's build a muscle around this. Now, that one thing can employ 3 or 4 tactics, there are many things that you're doing around that one thing. Marshall Goldsmith, who's coaching, I got certified in stakeholder-centered coaching years ago. One of the things that I like about him is this notion of feed forward rather than feedback. So an exercise I like to do with teams is for individuals to come in and they get to pick one thing they'd like to get better at. what's interesting, when you ask people to give feedback to one another, there's a tenseness that happens. There's a worry. How do I say this? How do I frame this? When I ask for you to give me a suggestion about getting better at this, people actually step closer to one another. Their eyes are connected. You often see the person that's giving the suggestions, even if they don't know you or prefer you, there's a natural tendency to care about giving you a quality suggestion.
And the difference in this is, instead of just asking for feedback, it's asking for a suggestion about this particular problem.
I'd like to be more effective in this area. Okay. Or as a leader, I'm looking at what I need to do more to grow and to be more effective in this next season. What's a suggestion you have for me?
Yeah. And that's taking the judgment out. And I think that's what shuts so many things down. When we worry about being judged, when we perceive we're being judged, then we just shut down. But the way you framed it is, I'm not asking for judgment. I'm asking for an idea, curiosity, a suggestion.
And the powerful receiver says, thank you.
Yeah.
They don't ask any further questions. They don't ask for clarification, because now we're into defensive.
Yeah, for sure.
So we just say thank you. And over time, those ideas and those people see us as people that they can come to.
Well, and that receiver of the feedback now becomes the position of power, because they can take it or leave it.
And no one has to ever know you just said thank you.
I know. I that's actually an amazing tool there.
That is. I'm going to use that in a group I'm working Monday.
It was wonderful. It was a real eye opener for me, how the body language, how everything changed when it went from feedback to suggestions.
Yeah, because it is about getting away from judgment. We so fear it. Yeah, something I sometimes do will ask a leader to write a paragraph about the leader you want to be. Describe who you would really love other people to see, and describe that person and some of the behaviors and traits that you're seeing there. And then they can compare to, how are people observing you? How does that compare to what people are actually seeing?
But Rachel, that whole notion of this stakeholder feedback or stakeholder suggestions, it ended up that teams I've worked with have maintained that, and in their quarterly meetings, they actually have sign-ups for times to get suggestions from people.
I love that. Love it. I have asked for, like, what's the one thing I can do better, or think like those sorts of things, but I like the suggestion better, because it does remove the judgment.
It does. It's brilliant.
This is one of my most surprising I didn't anticipate having this takeaway in this session. So thank you both for helping me grow. But I'm kind of reflecting, and what's really interesting, like it's almost like a paradox, like a confidence paradox, and I know that there's a concept of that kind of exists, maybe even the authenticity paradox. Like, you have to feel innately comfortable being vulnerable to ask for this kind of feedback, right? You have to innately have some kind of, base level of confidence to be able to build some of the self-awareness, because that journey can be hard. But also, you have to kind of get to that place too, right? It's like a chicken and the egg. And maybe this goes back, you mentioned, I think, Bonnie, too, both of you have talked about this, but like focusing on like one thing at a time. Is that how do you get on this wheel, basically? Is just kind of picking the one entry point?
Yeah. Yes, I think so.
I think it can be generated by you, or it can be generated by what you've heard. It can be generated by something you observe, that as the world is changing, as the system is changing around me, this new thing will be required. More of this will need to be there. And if I say to myself, oh, yuck, maybe that's my place of growth. If it's a requirement, the whole notion of technology and digital and what's required there for me. I remember when the internet showed up. I'm old. And when the internet showed up, there were people that said, I'm not using it.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm not doing that. Oh, Rachel. We had real resistors. I'm not doing that.
Yeah. And I'm even older. I remember my mother-in-law who was, we had a family dealership, and she did all of the accounting and bookkeeping. And she said, when the computer rolls in, I'm rolling out. And the computer rolled in, and she rolled out. She said, I am not
Truly
to learn everything over in an entirely new way. And she was old and able to do that. But there are a lot of young people who are facing new technology, new different things, that they don't have the option of just checking out. They need to lean into it in some way.
They don't. But I will say I've been surprised to some of the people that I've kind of run across very recently, whether I was coaching or, just in other interactions in life, and they are not on board with the AI for whatever reason. And I mean, it's AI everything all at once everywhere, right?
Opposing sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's almost,
That's interesting.
You almost look at AI as being as big of a change as the internet was. I mean, there's a lot to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do think it's transformational in the same way,
it was
maybe
almost
more
like when
so.
we got cell phones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, real cell phones that were computers in our hands, our smartphones, versus those ginormous things that.
Oh, yeah, that look like, they were this big.
Look like walkie-talkies. And I mean, it changed how we lived and worked.
I have one more final question for you guys. Is there anything that I didn't ask you guys that you feel like you want to just kind of double click on?
The notion of self-awareness, there's this notion of reflection that Bonnie mentioned.
Yeah.
The introspection that doesn't come with every personality naturally.
Yeah. And doesn't come with a crowded schedule either.
Right? Yeah.
And busy families and kids that have homework and, all those things that hijack our world and our life and our brain. I think having a disciplined practice of reflection.
And so what is that? Is that just time blocks in there? Is it journaling?
Does
it matter?
Yours. I don't know what I don't know what your practices are, but developing that discipline around what works for you, and it can be used for many things, but that discipline of maybe several times a day, maybe it's not all one block.
Or if you're stuck on something, you pause and you journal and try to understand what is stopping you, and you understand it. I've suggested to several people that they do a retreat with themselves. Go away, overnight or something, have the key questions you need to reflect on and ask yourself. It's almost that personal check-in, just like you have a physician's check-in once a year or twice a year. You should have
I love that idea.
Personal check-in at least once a year, if not twice. I think in today's world it needs to be twice. But having the key questions around what am I doing? Where is it that I'm trying to go? What are the relationships that are important? I don't know what all the questions are, but those key questions you should really reflect on. And then you can either go away overnight or someplace interesting and do that yourself, or you could do it in pieces. Just go off to a coffee shop somewhere or out in the sunshine, with a takeaway cappuccino, and you sit and reflect on a certain number of things. But it's space and time, and it's built in. I started to do that. I was traveling to fabulous places around the world. And I always try to take the last plane out and the first plane home. And I thought, what is wrong with you? You should stay a little longer and do your personal reflection. And so I started to do that. I had a notebook of the questions I needed to ask myself and the things I needed to do to really be at my best. And then I would pick some of them when I was in a place, and I would just stay an extra night maybe. Just instead of taking a late plane at night, I would leave at noon the next day. And just a little bit of time. It's amazing how it allowed me to do things like list everything that I'm doing complete, including community work, family work, all the rest, and then rate it on how, what level of priority is it? How satisfying is it to me? Who else could do this? And I made huge progress on things. I realized I'd been president of an international association for about 5 years. It was time for me to move on. I made decisions when I did things like that, but I had to get away from the hubbub to be able to see it and put it into the context of who I am and where I'm trying to go and how I want my life to be.
Bonnie, to ping off of that, and I know you and I had mothers that we cared for at the end of their lives. I think I bring that up because life presents new things also. So, trying to fit them in and their high value to you is really a place of drain, is really a place of exhaustion. And so that kind of searching, that kind of reflection, when these new things, maybe it's a new baby in the house, maybe it's a move, and it's all new doctors and dentists and kids' schools or whatever. But whenever life brings you a very big change, I think it's also a great time to pause, because sometimes we're the busiest in those, and we probably need to pause more than ever, and we don't give ourselves that gift. To Bonnie's point, take that afternoon.
Oh, that's such a good insight. I mean, especially when you get stuck in that momentum that you've been in, right? And when you bring in things like, the sandwich generation and dual caretaking and all of that is so hard.
My mom was on her final runway, and I realized I had the opportunity to be with her and help her, do important things in life. And so I did change my work. I shifted what I was doing so that I would be present. I will never, ever regret doing that. That was really important work. Yeah. And it easily could have slipped by me without realizing that that was something I needed to grab a hold of.
And that's a big shift even personally too, right? I'm glad you had the opportunity to do that and you had that foresight for sure. I'm sure that will definitely help someone in our audience. So kind of coming back to the audience, Heather, also from LinkedIn, really wanted to know about your point of view about how to remain authentic, and particularly in this digital world, right? Where there's a lot of value signaling and over indexing on corporate trends and things. How do you really show up as yourself, whether it's in person or like on things like LinkedIn?
Well, I think it starts by knowing yourself, knowing who you are that you want to hang on to, and not feeling the pressure that I have to comment on everything or show up differently. I think it goes back to really being solid in who I am and what my values are and what my goals are, and not being influenced away. It's almost like that anchor, and not letting the wind blow it. It needs to be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
But it does start with understanding who I am and what I value and what I want to contribute.
I agree. I think in some ways less is more. I think, to Bonnie's point, it starts with what she said, and then it's like, courage and candor and care need to be involved in anything that, know that there's others that won't agree with you. Know that, that comments may come, but if we say our truth in courage, and we do it courageously with candor, but with care for others and making space for their points of view, I think that serves us well in a digital world and will garner less outrage.
Yeah. Have you guys read I think it was called the Authenticity Paradox.
Yeah.
It's a Harvard Business Review article. Maybe we can link
Perhaps.
to it in the short show notes. It's an old one, but I had received feedback about just like adapting my style. Like, this is not quite to Heather's question about just like feeling like you have to over index on these corporate trends, but knowing yourself and knowing when you do want to change. And, and I ask myself often, I'm like, would I change this about myself if I went to a funeral? Like, kind of morbid, but like that tells me how I would change my behavior or my sense of humor and how it would show up, or my clothing, right? And those sorts of things to be right for the environment. If the answer is no, I would still show up that way, then I feel pretty rooted there.
There was a great clip from Cint Marshall.
I love Scent. Yeah.
Who was asked to be on, I want to say, the board of AT&T, and she's speaking. And the requester, the person who called her, a woman called her and asked her if she would be willing to do this. And she said, you need to change your name. There's no Cint. You're either Cindy or Cynthia. And I left a magazine on your desk that has clothing and hair that I think would be best. Anyway, it went on that way. And in since self-talk, she's thinking, I got to say no. And how do I keep my good job and decline?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's not for me. But I don't want to lose my day job because I got people and I love what I do. And so, she said, well, you need to help me decline. Well, it wasn't very long after that the chairman of the board, I think, called her and said, Cynth, we want you. We want all of you. That's why the invitation was extended. So that was in some time, maybe 2000s. But fast forward, the Dallas Mavericks were in all kinds of cultural trouble. And Mark Cuban called her and said, we need you to come fix us. So instead of fixing you, it was to fix us. I just think it's a great example of, to Bonnie's point of knowing yourself, there is a point where you're not just adapting or flexing. You're choosing to not be you for some purpose, for some gain.
Since it's amazing too. You know what? I'll also link to her. She's got a relatively new book out too. We should link that to the show notes so people can at least find that as well.
Yeah, she's amazing. And so I just thought the courage to say no when it's the gold, brass, whatever you want to say, ring, and you're probably risking your current job by, she's not on the bus, she's not loyal, she's not, whatever. What message was the declination going to send?
Yeah. And if you give in to something that isn't your true self, there are all these things that are going to step in the way of you being successful. When you feel like something isn't right, something is off, often it's because you aren't aligned with your values or your goals or whatever it is. Because if we listen to ourselves, if we listen to our inner self, it will help give us clues about when to say yes and when to say no. When we say yes to something, we're saying no to something else. And so why say yes to something that isn't right? Because we might have just said no to something that would have been very right.
A colleague friend of ours gave me a book years ago, and the title was something about your best yes.
Oh, yeah, it is your best yes. I think that is the name.
Your best yes.
Awesome. I'm noted. Well, you guys, this was such an amazing and grounding conversation. As always, I learned a ton from both of you. Anytime I talk with you, I have new
I can always learn
readings,
from Bonnie.
new books. Yep. When she and I met for scoping the show and kind of talking about it too, I walked out and ordered a book. So I thank you very much for just sharing your decades of experience with the audience and with me. It really was a privilege. For those listening, if you do want to work on your personal mastery, I am going to link several of these things that we talked about today in the show notes, and I will probably put together a free resource for folks just to download. So check that out. So Patti and Bonnie, thank you so much for the wisdom you shared today and for modeling what mastery looks like in action. For those of you who are listening and you're ready to work on your personal mastery, we will put the resources that we talked about today in the show notes and give you a free resource that you can download. And then if this episode resonated with you, please subscribe, share it with a friend, and we look forward to talking with you again. This is Rachel, Patti, and Bonnie with The Shift Show.